Hello everybody, this is John Mark Johnson Jr. again. I'm the host of Relationship and Truth, and today I'm here to do another video in the series on the Panic-demic divide among Christians. And at the start of this series, I was trying to be fairly balanced in how I presented things, issues from both sides and whatnot. However, as this whole situation has been unfolding throughout the year, it has become very clear that there is a very dangerous element at work in America to divide the nation, and that same element exists in Christianity, again trying to divide, but also to sway, and to sway people towards things that would benefit one particular group of people. I'm not saying that this particular group is necessarily homogeneous, but there is a loosely defined group out there that would definitely benefit from Christians going in a direction that historically they have not gone, especially here in America. America has a very strong Reformed Christian tradition that has greatly influenced American politics and policy in the past, and it has been slowly going away from that, and that is because of a rather subversive influence that has entered into Christianity. And the fact of the matter is that American Christians didn't always think like they do now. American Christians nowadays are strangely kind of apolitical in a lot of regards, and if they're not, they tend to be very much so person-centric and not necessarily worldview-centric. A lot of American Christians in general do not think in terms of worldview anymore, which is extremely scary and dangerous. And out of all of the weird things that have happened this year, I find myself in a place where I'm actually going to agree with someone who is theologically very distinct from me, and frankly someone that I would not have a whole lot of confidence in calling orthodox. This is a person whose soteriology in particular I have criticized, and I do not believe it to be a biblical soteriology. This is also a person whose understanding of the biblical text I've criticized. This person is a proponent of more or less the ecclesiastical text position as far as I can determine, and a person that has flat out contradicted himself regarding that position. He has given, for example, he was at one point asked how he would know within his system of understanding, how he would know that disputed texts like, say, the pericope adultery, the account of the woman caught in adultery that is found in John 7:53 through 8:11, how he would know within his system of understanding if that text was inauthentic. And the standard that he gave was that if we found a Byzantine manuscript, a manuscript that was Byzantine in the Gospels, in particular in the Gospel of John, or in a specific, or even a group of early Byzantine manuscripts that did not have that particular account in them, or some similar textual variant that didn't have them in it, but it was a Byzantine manuscript, then that would be sufficient evidence for him to reject the pericope adultery as being authentic. Well, those kinds of manuscripts exist, and he has even used some of those manuscripts as examples for other things, pointing out that, say, the Byzantine text actually does occur at a fairly early stage. He has used Codex Alexandrinus to prove this point before, and frankly, people on the other side don't dispute that the Byzantine text is an early text. It is one of the earliest texts. That's not really debatable. No one contests that, but he has used texts like Codex Alexandrinus to prove that point. But the irony is that Codex Alexandrinus does not contain the pericope adultery, as do a number of other texts that are Byzantine in the Gospels. And that was the exact standard that he cited as being what would be necessary to show that this was an inauthentic addition that was added on later. And yet he hasn't renounced it, he hasn't admitted the contradiction, etc., etc. He's not a particularly honest man when it comes to those kinds of things. He's also not a particularly historically inclined man when it comes to matters of soteriology. He is one of the people who have been a proponent of the Federal Vision heresy, and it is a heresy in its full virulent forms. Now, he tends to dress it up in a lot of orthodox language, but there are members of that group, if you will, of people who propose and propound and support the federal vision, who have been much more clear as to what their soteriology actually is, and it is not Orthodox Reformed soteriology at all. And while he doesn't tend to go as far as what he says as some of they do, he does endorse them. He has worked with them, and he has not denounced any of their work. So while he might say things in a little bit more orthodox fashion, his proclivities, in so much as his associations and his lack of denunciations, have been really clear that he is not orthodox when it comes to soteriology, and he has flat out contradicted himself in other areas. All that proves that he is an imperfect human being, and as far as I can tell, in certain essential areas, certainly not orthodox. The textual issues are not necessarily an issue of orthodoxy all that much. The soteriology is much more concerning in that regard. Textual preference as to Byzantine text versus critical text versus ecclesiastical text, etc., is not a matter of orthodoxy in and of itself. Sometimes the logical reasoning that gets applied to it can be, but in and of itself it is not. But the soteriology issues definitely are, and because of that I'm greatly suspicious of this person. But people who are vastly wrong in some areas can still manage to be quite correct in other areas. For example, I've seen atheists correctly exegete Romans 9, whereas my fellow Christians who are Arminians cannot correctly exegete Romans 9 if their life depended on it. But atheists, just looking at the text without any personally invested bias in it, can clearly see what the text says. No, it says that. It says God's in charge and that this is ultimately of God. However you want to slice that, it's ultimately of God. And your will is not free in an ultimate sense. It might be free in some other sense, but it's not free in an ultimate sense, etc., etc. A lot of atheists have been able to correctly observe that, correctly propound that, whereas, like I said, a lot of people who would profess to be Christians, who are on the Arminian side of things, cannot correctly exegete that text for the life of them. This is a case that I believe with this particular fellow as well. While I would not, put him forward as being orthodox in certain essential areas like soteriology, even someone as far away from the faith as an atheist can still look at the text of Scripture and can still look at history and come to correct conclusions. And that is what I would ask that you do regarding this person. I am suggesting that you watch a video in which he talks about the role of government and what the role of the government ought to be as per what the Bible has to say. I actually agree with him in this area, which, like I said, is an astounding thing, and I frankly don't much like admitting that I agree with him on this one. But the fact of the matter is, he's right. And he's not right because he's some great, wise, profound person. Yes, he is a philosopher, but that's usually the opposite of wisdom. No, the reason why he's right is because he's actually exegeting the text correctly in those cases. And when he talks about the history and the importance of how certain things developed historically, he actually does them correctly, views them correctly, he views them honestly, and with a full recognition, a full honest recognition of what actually happened in Christian history that led to those points. So all that to say, as weird as it is, I would appreciate it if you would watch the video in the description box that has a sermon from Douglas Wilson. Thank you for your time and attention. Bye-bye.